The Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass. Where we make it happen, grab your seat, let's have a blast. At the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast.
Okay, I'm joined today by Rob Begg and Richard Simpson, and the observant amongst you will know that I've recorded a podcast with each of them individually. And at the time, I wanted to get them back because of a spiritual journey, and we need to define spiritual before we go any further. So, Rob, you first. Can you just introduce yourself and remind everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Rob Begg. So, who am I? Good question. Probably what I do is the easier question to answer, but I work predominantly with entrepreneurs, supporting them to accelerate their business growth, their success, their freedom, ultimately helping them get what they really want. And to do that, it's really about fundamentally helping them to get out of their own way. Most people recognize they're in their own way. But in order to get out of our own way, we need to understand who we're in the way of. And so that's really the essence of what I do, help people understand their true nature. When we get to that, then it's much, much easier to get what it is we really want. So
okay. Cool.
That's it in a nutshell.
I don't know whether you can hear my dogs fighting, either of you, in the background.
No.
Can you hear anything?
I thought that was your stomach rumbling after a heavy lunch.
Fighting. They have been quiet all day, not a cheep out of them. And at 3:10 when we're recording, they decide to have a fight. All right. So I'm probably not going to edit that out. Richard, hello again. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Richard Simpson. I am the joint managing director and co-owner of a brand agency called Taburn.
Okay. Lovely. All right. How did you meet Rob?
So I've been on a few podcasts recently, and CrossFit has come up every single time. So I'm so sorry about this, but I genuinely met Rob in a CrossFit gym through a mutual friend who was the coach, and he said to me, "You should meet this guy. He's really interesting." And that's what happened. And so Rob and I had a coffee at our office in. So this is pre-COVID, and it was during that meeting he said something which sort of stuck with me for a good number of years, which was along the lines of 98% of our actions are a consequence of our unconscious thinking. And I thought, God, that's really interesting. And from that point, which I think must have been about 2017, 2018, it just made me very consciously aware of my thought processes and thought patterns. But it wasn't actually until I think summer of 2021 that we started working together.
Okay. So
it takes a while to make decisions.
Yeah.
So good things come to those who wait.
Exactly.
98%. Repeat that sentence again, Richard.
I might have just completely made that up, but it was something along the lines. It was something along the lines of. I mean, the key point, Rebecca, is that our actions are a consequence of our subconscious thinking.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. Certainly, the work I've done with Rob has allowed me to become aware of my thoughts and what they are.
Okay.
And then how I choose in turn to respond to them.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. So when you did finally work with Rob, what is it as a business? Yeah. Did you go and work with him as a business leader and owner for the business's sake, for your sake, or a bit of both?
It's a good question. I think it was primarily driven for my needs in relation to the relationship that I have had with the business.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of both, but the initiating the engagement was primarily driven by a sense of what I felt I needed.
Okay. Interesting. That's really interesting. And what is it that you felt back at that time that Rob could give you that was missing?
Again, no, a really good question.
Almost like I'm a coach or something.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. I think, personally speaking, my experience, I love sports, and so I've always worked with, or coaching has always been in my life at some point, whether it's been a rugby coach or a CrossFit coach or whatever. So the idea of a coach in business was always quite interesting. And so I sort of got the idea of the value of that as a sort of a sounding board. I think at that point I was looking for a mindset shift.
Okay.
Because I think having experienced a year of the pandemic where we'd made some changes to the business, and it had quite a negative effect on my outlook and my energy, and so it was wanting to try and rediscover a passion again, and a sort of a sense of reconnecting with the business again. That led me to that point.
Okay. And Rob, when Richard came to you, what did you see in him? Because I know you don't accept all clients, and kind of clients have to almost be ready for what you do. What did you see in him that you thought, oh, right, okay, we could do some good work here?
That's a great question. So I think the key ingredient in terms of those I work with the common denominator is a willingness to take responsibility.
Okay.
And that sounds like a bit of a throwaway statement, given that most entrepreneurs would say that they take responsibility and all the rest of it. But really, it's about understanding that we're always only ever seeing a mirror of our own awareness. There's never anyone to blame other than ourselves. There's never anyone to blame for our circumstances. We need to look to ourselves. It's always coming from us. We experience the evidence of what we tune our awareness to. So if we're not prepared to accept that, we don't have to accept it initially, but if we're not prepared to even explore that, then we render ourselves, if you like, powerless. We disempower ourselves when it comes to creating change. It's very easy to go saying, well, actually, if it wasn't for X, Y, and Z, the economy, politicians, the bank, my wife, my husband, my employer, it's very easy to point the finger. But for as long as we're pointing the finger, we're not enabling or empowering ourselves to create the change, nor are we able to really see the truth that actually everything that appears to be an external circumstance is actually a mirror of our own consciousness. We get what we tune our awareness into, whether we accept that or not. So the short answer to your question is a willingness to take responsibility.
Great.
And Richard had that in spades. And it's not about beating ourselves up. It's very easy to do that too. To go to the other end of the spectrum and blame ourselves and say, oh, I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy enough and all that stuff. And that's not what it's about.
Yeah. Having met Richard, I can see, well, perhaps met the Richard post Rob work. I don't know whether I'd have seen the same in him pre Rob work. Who knows?
Just the old guy. He was a
Well, when we met at that networking event, you did tell me that. Hang on. I'm just going to pause because now they're barking. Hang on. Okay, well, that's the dogs got rid of now. So yeah, when we met at that networking event, you said that you were quite a different person. You looked different physically. So I don't know whether you want to share a bit of that element of going through this process of working with Rob.
Yeah. So I think what I wanted to do, I suppose I became very aware of how I could, fundamentally have the same sort of day: get up, go to work, do your job, chat to people, do things, come home, and you can do that, you know, every day of a working week. But the experience that the feelings that you have in relation to that very similar experience can veer wildly away from one day to the next based on your interpretation of thoughts and so forth. And so for me, it just didn't make sense that, I could win a pitch and then all of a sudden we're going to win Nike and we're going to buy agencies and we're going to take over the world and float the stock market and all this kind of stuff. Equally, by the same token, could lose a pitch and end up living in a cardboard box under Waverley Bridge, which was one of the expressions. So I've talked about with Rob before. So there was that sort of mental side of things. But then I think so much of the work that we do with Rob is in identity and if we identify as being in a particular way, then that plays out in our experience. And as a keen CrossFitter, I'd felt I was probably a little bit heavier than I needed to be, and so I was able to identify with myself in a different way, which led me to actually changing my physique. I felt moved to do things with my diet and my training program, and that saw instant results almost. Having spent the best part of, I don't know, 4 or 5 years trying to shed maybe 7-8 kgs, but it just seemed to happen very very suddenly because I was identifying with being a particular way.
That's fascinating. So there's an emotional, physiological, and physical outcome here. And Rob, before the podcast, you said, look, define spiritual journey, because this is the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast, and I wanted to talk to you two about more of a spiritual journey. So what is your definition of that spiritual journey that you do appear to take business leaders through?
I slightly shy away from the journey term, although it is a journey, it's also not a journey. It's really, I think entrepreneurship is really helpful if we're paying attention to help us understand the truth about who we are.
Okay.
Because we go on a journey of shifting. We start out in business and we identify as somebody who is in startup, and then several years later we might be owning a business that's turning over 10 million, 20 million, $500,000, it doesn't really matter, but it's a journey if we're paying attention to realize that actually we're always experiencing the outcome of what we're tuning our consciousness to and what we're identified with. And so therefore, if we really understand that, we say, well, what is it that I desire? And if I tune my identity into that, I get to have the experience of it. So I can't be anything outside of myself. I must be something more, something greater than anything that's in my experience. And so we start to look at the one thing that in our life that never changes throughout time, because the contents of our experience changes.
Mm-hmm.
The relationships, our bodies change, our thoughts change, our feelings change, our emotions change. Well, what's the one constant in our entire life experience? Well, the awareness that's looking back at us from the mirror. When we look in the mirror, there's an awareness. We've always known that we are us. So who or what is that awareness, that one constant present in our entire experience? And the answer is that's who we really are. That's the life force that animates our body, gives life to us, and causes us, is the cause of our experience based on what we're tuning our awareness to.
I
So
understand.
a bit of a long answer. So the illusion is that we have free will.
Okay.
That's really scary for us as a concept for our ego. If when we just identify as a mind and body, of course I've got free will, I can choose anything I like. But the only thing we really have the ability to choose is our state of consciousness, what we're identifying with or as. And then all of our behavior, as Richard said at the start of the call, all of our thoughts, feelings, behaviors line up with what we're identified with, and we get to experience the evidence of what we're identified with. And that in turn is designed to support us to recognize the truth about who we really are. So we can start to shift our awareness, literally our awareness, tune it into our desires rather than our obstacles and our fears. If we're focused on trying to fix stuff all the time, if our awareness is tuned into what we need to fix in order to get to the next level, we're just going to keep finding more stuff that we need to fix. Because the mirror is perfect. It's always reflecting who we are being, not what we're doing.
That's fascinating. So, in order for me to process this and help our listeners process this, and I'm going to push this out there and see what you think. So, my husband says to me, "It's all right for you, Rebecca, in your little fluffy world with your rose tinted spectacles. Everything's okay."
Yep.
And I say, "Yes, it is, because that's the world I choose to be in." And so my demeanor, my outcomes, whatever thoughts are always in relation to everything's going to be okay. And he can't get his head around that. Are we saying the same thing, Rob, or have I missed the mark?
Kind of missed the mark. It's
Okay.
a podcast. The podcast as a forum for diving in at the deep end is. But if we want to dive in at the deep end, your husband is showing up in your consciousness.
Okay.
He's showing up. He's mirroring how you hold him in your consciousness. If you want your husband to show up if you want your husband to show up differently, take responsibility for holding him in a different light in your awareness, and he will reflect that to you. But that's a really extreme concept to try and grasp, especially in the space of a podcast. But what I do isn't mainstream. Mainstream teachings don't support people to get what they really want.
I understand. No, I do get that.
We're only ever experiencing the mirror of our consciousness, and then we're looking at the outside world and saying, why won't they change? Why won't they be different? Well, they can't. They can't change because there's no one ever to change but self.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. Right. I get that. Thank you. So, Richard, what kind of impact has this had on your business?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's had a huge impact in terms of the relationship that I've had with the business, because to Rob's earlier point, I suddenly became aware of a mindset of always needing to fix stuff. There's always problems. There's always something coming up, and over the period of the past wee while since I've had this new level of awareness, I can catch myself, and it's that sort of egoic thinking, which fundamentally is there to protect and to look out for us, but it's habitual, and I guess the ego has an infinite playbook of ways in which it can keep you grounded in that state, and not necessarily want you to make the changes that Rob was describing there. So with that level of awareness, I stop moving from the sort of the peaks and the troughs, the highs and the lows of income and winning and profit and performance and all these things, into a much more sort of balanced, steady state, and also reconnecting with positive assumptions around the business. So I'm in the incredibly fortunate position that it's been around for a very long time in relative to our industry, with an excellent reputation. And so by tuning into these assumptions and recognizing that when things come up that a previous version of myself would have perceived to have been issues, actually they're opportunities for self-inquiry. Well, why am I thinking that? Why am I feeling that? Why am I experiencing this? And it's an opportunity to change. So it's really helped repair in some ways a relationship between myself and the business that was becoming potentially quite damaged as a result of the real roller coaster highs and lows and emotions.
Wow.
Which were just a reflection of your internal state.
Exactly. Yes. So instead of blaming everyone else, I just take responsibility for it myself because it's all my creation. So
that's absolutely fascinating. And how have other people around you reacted? And I almost daren't ask that question after what Rob just said, to be honest. But
they'll love me. They'll think I'm amazing.
What have you observed about the people around you?
Joking aside, I have a great relationship with our colleagues and with our clients, and I was just talking about that with Malcolm the other day. Actually, we're in a very fortunate position where we have wonderful clients that we've worked with for a long time, and in some ways, some have become friends. And so there's a sort of greater sense of awareness around how lucky we are to get to experience that. Occasionally, some things come up. There's maybe a scenario within the team, but again, rather than jumping towards some sort of blame or, forgive the bluntness, a sort of adopting a victim-like mindset. Oh, why is this happening again to me? What you go, okay, well, I'm not sure that is particularly helpful, and then having a conversation with the person involved and resolving it.
Okay. Has I don't know, have you expanded the business? Has it grown? What's happened? If I was an accountant asking you, what has happened on the pieces of paper that they deem to be so important?
Sure.
Because our listeners will want to know.
No, of course. So we had a quite a challenging period through COVID, and we moved the business away from an area that we'd been working in. So we lost a bit of our top line. So really what we've done is I guess stabilize and get back into a position of steady development. So what one of the scenarios that emerged as a result of making that decision was that we didn't have as much monthly recurring revenue because we weren't hosting and maintaining websites anymore. And by going back into working on more brand projects, which typically, in my experience, can be project driven. There's a need to win more projects. Now, I had a bit of a difficult spell actually in October where it looked like things were challenging financially actually. Sorry, not from a business stability perspective, but in terms of hitting income targets. And so I spoke with Rob about it, and I don't mind sharing. We discussed, well, what are the assumptions that I hold true, and I wrote them down. Longevity, reputation, stability, quality of work, talent of people, quality of client, that sort of thing. And then, I gave myself the gift of experiencing what certain goals that relate to these assumptions would feel like. What it would feel like to win some clients, what it would feel like to convert some projects, what it would feel like to expand the scope of existing clients. And so from the 14th of November to the end of Christmas, we originated and converted £217,000 worth of net new business. Sorry, of new business. I beg your pardon, new business.
Wow.
90 grand of which came from existing clients, and 117 grand came from net new opportunities that had been originated and converted.
Fabulous. That's fantastic.
So I mean, the previous performance was a result of previous stories I was telling about myself coming up. Oh, right, we don't have recurring revenue. We're back in the project game. We need to win new business, and it became a sort of a sense of resistance and a tension, and I guess these old stories then created that experience. And then by reconnecting with this truth and reminding myself about the possibilities and the potential that we have within us, we were able to turn that around.
Yeah, amazing. Well, congratulations. Rob, when there will be people listening to this who run businesses who are going, well, that's all lovely. Sounds a little bit woo-woo to me. What's the first step in sort of becoming aware that you are the common denominator for your results in your life? What needs to happen?
The easiest and the most challenging way, I believe, is to look in the rearview mirror of your life.
Okay.
Say, can I see a correlation between what I've been entertaining emotionally in terms of my assumptions and my life experience, whether that's to do with business or relationships or whatever. The problem with doing that is that the ego wants to be right. The ego is always trying to defend our current sense of self, our current identity. The ego is not up for the change. It's our true nature that wants the change. The ego wants to preserve the status quo. But I get the whole woo-woo thing. I'm the son of a East End Glasgow factory owner. Speak to me about spirituality 20 years ago, I'd have laughed. At a time when I believed that hard work, success was, I was running a business with 30 odd staff, and I thought the only way to get ahead in life is to work really hard and do certain things. And it was all very much on the mental and physical plane. But if we look in the rearview mirror, we can absolutely see, I can see that my business or my life or my relationships or my health is a function of the stories I've been telling myself. Our stories are on display, and they're on display for our benefit so that we can see ourselves in the mirror and say, wow, that's how it works. So when I make the change within, if I leave the world alone and make the change within, the world reflects it to me. We can't want abundance. We can't experience abundance in the outside world or in our bank account for coming at it from scarcity. Wanting and having are not the same thing. You can't want it and have it. You've got to move from the wanting to the internal having in order to experience it in the world, because the world's just a mirror. So just look in the rearview mirror is the easiest way.
I like that expression.
But don't use, and the problem. Certainly, one of the wake up calls for me was the realization of the degree to which I'd been running my whole life, trying to drive my future using the rearview mirror. Because we're always living in the past. Like our physical world, our this month's sales, our current results are a reflection of what we've been bringing life to internally. So if we use those to drive our decisions, our physical world and our thoughts and feelings about our physical, if we use those as the basis for our decision making, we're driving the car using rear view mirror. Now we might get somewhere over time,
Mm-hmm.
but there's going to be a lot more. You ever try to drive a car in reverse at speed?
No, thank
You're
you.
going to have a few more speed wobbles. Whereas what we need to learn to do is say, well, what if this is my current experience, and I use that to establish my preferences, what do I desire, and give our heart to that in the present moment. Because nobody's ever experienced the past or the future. That, again, a really weird concept to grasp, but it's always been now. We have memories of the past and we imagine the future, but they only exist in one place, in our mind.
Okay, so say a business owner, leader has looked in the rearview mirror of their life and they've gone, hang on a minute, I'm the common denominator here. There are
Yep.
themes that pop up and it's always me in the middle of it all.
Yep.
And I come back to Richard on this actually. Was it a little bit scary at first? Was it exciting? What were the feelings initially when you started on this?
Not at all. I think I don't know whether this is a limiting belief or not about myself, but my experience is that I put everything I have into anything I do, and so when I committed to working with Rob and he committed to working with me, I swallowed the book, and actually the results were instant. I mean, it was pretty pretty mind-bending at points, and I was guilty of being really quite evangelical. I would get on my soapbox and start broadcasting to anyone who would listen. And I mean, within that first 6 months, the business was flying. We won about it must have been about $500,000 in new business that year.
Wow.
And it was really there was a sense of lightness that I felt. I remember the day at which I said, I need to do something, I need to change. I would come off a board meeting, it'd been quite tough. And I was grey and tired. And my wife said, why don't you just go out for a walk? So I went for a walk. And I live in the country, I live in a converted farmsteading in the middle of nowhere. And they were spreading muck in the field. And it stank. And it felt like I was literally and metaphorically wading through fields of manure. I'm not sure if I can swear or not. So
you can, yes, it's fine. Okay. We're not the BBC.
And then within a matter of weeks that had gone. Personally, the challenges that I've experienced have been the tendency to regress back to previous stories, previous ideas, which again is back to that point about the ego resisting change, and with its infinite playbook, just recognizing when particular triggers happen and trying to perpetuate that thought pattern. But the skill is to recognize it for what it is and reconnect with who we really are.
This is a practice, then.
It is, and it's about ensuring that your vision is for something that your heart desires and something that you love. Most entrepreneurs, and this was certainly my journey, most entrepreneurs are actually going after the opposite of what they don't want. It's fear-based vision. Mm-hmm. And when we're pursuing something which is basically something to try and prove to be safe, secure, approved, worthy, good enough, loved, all of that stuff, coming from one core belief, the belief that we are separate and that we're just a mind and body. But most entrepreneurs are trying to prove themselves in the world in one way, shape, or form. It might be largely unconscious. And when we're doing that, rather than pursuing something out of love, our identity will seek to preserve itself. Our ego, that's when our ego is at its strongest. Although ego itself is just a belief, that's all it is. It's the one core belief. That's all it is. It doesn't hold any power when we see it for what it is. But the key really is to be pulled by the love of what we're doing rather than trying to push ourselves to get to a point in time to feel good enough, because that's an illusion. We're never going to feel good enough on the back of achieving something. And again, look in the rearview mirror to look at how long lasting was the feeling of getting the new car or the new house, or the feeling's always generated from within. It's never coming from without.
I interviewed I chatted to an entrepreneur the other week. On paper, the accountants would say phenomenally successful, sold his business for £250 million. Okay.
Yeah.
And he told me the story of going into Aston Martin and paying cash for his Aston Martin. And he said it was a terrible feeling. He felt awful and empty inside. And he also tells a story of whilst he was building this business, or it might have been afterwards, I'm not sure, of him and two other very successful, again, on paper, business owners on a yacht in Monte Carlo during Formula One season. So, to the outside world, everybody would be like, oh, wow, they've made it. There's three of them sitting around crying, saying how deeply unhappy they were. And I've shared this story with somebody, and their reaction, I'm really interested to hear what you two say. Their reaction was, yes, but he can say that now because he's got the money. Now, what would your response be to that?
Well, my response would be that happiness is who we are. It's fundamental, intrinsic to our nature. It's the one thing that everybody is seeking. And yet it's the only thing that people are seeking for its own sake. Ask people why they're going after their goals. They believe on some level they're going to feel happier for the having of it. The reason everyone's seeking happiness is it's because it's who we are. People are seeking themselves. That's what they're really wanting, is to find out who they are.
Okay. I get it.
And I now do what I do, curiously. I love what I do. But I got to a point in my life where, I don't talk about it readily I've talked about it quite readily, but I don't talk about it a lot. But I twisted myself so far out of shape trying to pursue getting to a point in time where I could feel safe, secure, good enough, worthy, loved, approved, all that stuff. Running a business, turning over a few million quid a year revenue. To the outside world, I looked like I had it all. Internally, I was as miserable as sin. And everybody is seeking themselves. Who we are is happiness. Who we are is love.
That's lovely, isn't it? That's really interesting because people are looking for that outside, and
can't be found.
Yeah, inside. I love that. And is that how you feel, Richard, these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I in some ways, from the age of 16, I'd always wanted to work in advertising. I realized my dream of owning and running a business, an agency of my own in 2015, and I coveted the fancy suits and the watches and the cars and all that kind of stuff, and I got all that. I've since given it all up because I was like, I'll be happy when I get that watch, or I'll be happy when I get that tailored suit, and I get it, and then it would be like, oh right, is that it? And so, I've found, I mean, if you excuse the collection of expensive trainers in the wall, that's a hobby.
But everybody's got to have a thing.
Exactly. But I mean, but generally, generally speaking, I don't have that. Oh, I just don't have that covetous sense that I used to have. I'll be happy when I get that car, or I'll be happy when I can get that material good. And then again, consequently, my relationship with the business changed. I'll be happy when we get to X million of income and we win Y client, and And it just, I mean, I'm in the very fortunate position. I love what I do. I mean, I get to swan around the place, meeting fascinating people, drinking coffee, eating nice meals, playing a bit of golf, helping them with some challenges within their business that seem relatively straightforward to me and our colleagues, and a very talented team who can come in and help. And I feel genuinely very, very grateful to be able to do that day in, day out.
Yeah.
And I think working with Rob has made me realise exactly what the motivation is. It isn't to get the fancy brand name above the door or to hit the revenue goal. It's actually to take great pleasure in helping people, whether that's to get on in their career or to grow and develop their business.
Yeah. It's beautiful to be able to do that. And your trainers are for you. You know, the bling and the watches is for everybody else, isn't it? But the trainer collection is for
Well,
you.
I think not. Yes, and the cars and the watches and all the trinkets are great. There's nothing wrong with that, and you can have all of that. But for the love of it, I'm going to buy an Aston Martin because I love Aston Martins, and I love my life, and I love but I'm not buying an Aston Martin so that I can drive it down the road and feel good enough or feel worthy or meet the approval of my neighbours.
Yeah.
I'm buying it for the love of the car or the love of the watch or the love of the trainers because it's something I'm passionate about rather than something I need in order to shore up my innate sense of lack from not knowing who I am.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. That
Totally.
makes sense.
The suit and the car was status.
Yeah.
These are because I get really excited about Tinker Hatfield designing a new pair of Nike Air Jordans.
You did. I remember talking to you about that. You did get very excited. Yes, you did. All right. Okay. This is my intention for this podcast to get you two together was to get an understanding for a wider audience out there who are very much stuck in what I would call perhaps a more less of a sensory experience about life and experiencing life through some quite narrow avenues, and to help broaden their thinking out and to help broaden those choices out, really. Because I think, well, as you know, my background's NLP, and we're all about developing choice from an unconscious place. And once you have choice, then, you know, lots of lovely things start to happen. What advice would you give? And this question's to both of you, so I'll maybe come to Rob first. What advice would you give to somebody who feels like they're on a hamster wheel and who isn't sure where to turn or what to do next?
Would be to take a little bit of time to take one's awareness away from what is, not to deny it, but to take awareness away from what is or from current thinking and beliefs about what's possible and the rearview mirror and all that stuff, and say, what would I love? If I could have anything in my life, what would I love? What would I really love? And what happens when we ask that question? Because that's coming from the heart. That's opening ourselves up to truth. What happens typically for people when they do that is the ego jumps in, the conditioning beliefs and stuff, and says, well, how's that going to happen? You can't have that, you know, or there's the conditioning based on our memories of the past, what we've been told as kids, all of that stuff. But if we open our heart to what we'd love, then for most of us, it's largely the same thing. People are really, the common denominators are largely the same. But, you know, I said to someone last week, said, I don't know what I want. I said, well, I know what you want. And I was being a bit facetious. I was trying to force a point, but, you know, time and money freedom, doing work I love, helping other people. Like, how's that for a simple equation for running your life by if you're in business?
Yeah.
So freedom, everyone's seeking freedom. Why are they seeking freedom? It's who we are.
Yeah.
We're not bound by this body when we're believe that we're just a mind and body. We're constricted and restricting ourselves. So my advice would be open your heart, because your heart's just a symbol for your true nature, for your I amness, for your intuition. That's all it is. And go back to ancient teachings. What would I love? And give life to that. Bring life to that. And the only way we can bring life to anything is in the present moment.
That's lovely. That's really good advice. Thank you. Richard?
And then we're unconditioned by stories.
The stories we tell ourselves, that's I think that's a big takeaway for me as well. I think that's good, definitely,
Yeah.
and useful for people. Richard, what would your advice be?
I wish you'd asked me first.
Sorry, I was giving you time to think. Or do you just want to say what Rob said?
What Rob said, but no, because I do love the sound of my own voice. I'll give my perspective, which is about, you know, being kind and loving to yourself. I mean, again, my experience had been a tendency to pay too much awareness to certain stories that I was telling myself based on the conditioning that I had experienced in my life. It all came from a place of love, but it could be, you know, my parents go, "Oh, careful, watch out, don't do this. Oh, watch out." And I know that they loved me dearly, and so they wanted to protect me. But ultimately, you know, it potentially felt like a sort of a cautiousness and a concern, which played out in difficult ways in my experience. And so actually being grateful for that, leading me to a point of awareness was huge. And in that point of awareness, realizing that, you know, you have to love thyself.
Wonderful. Thank you, chaps. I so appreciate your time. It's been lovely, and I'm going to make this podcast episode compulsory listening because I just think it's got so much in it that will, if people really listen to it and like you say, open themselves up to it. And I love that, Rob, open their heart up to it. It's very specific, and I think that's a great start. I think they can benefit hugely.
Yeah, because we learn to close our heart. We have to return to being innocent as we were as children, and not live by our five senses. Live from our heart. I feel moved to share a quotation with you, which I shared with Richard the other day, and if off the top of my head, I might butcher it slightly, but it's one of my favorite quotations, which is, "When I look inside myself and see that I am nothing, that is wisdom. When I look outside myself and I see that I am everything, that is love. And between the two, my life flows."
Wow.
And you know, we're not here having this human experience for all that long. And yet who gets to the end and says, "Do you know what? I wish I'd taken it a lot more seriously, given myself a harder time, beaten myself up a bit more, and told myself I wasn't good enough."
Not anybody.
Exactly. It's called the game of life for a reason. Yeah. Not the war with self.
It is a game. It is fun. It is. Yeah.
It can be.
It's playful. You know, it's it's playful. I could go on forever, but that's amazing. And you chaps have got places to go and people to look after and what have you. So thank you so much once again. I really appreciate it.
No, likewise, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's been
The Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass.